I grew up in what most would call a typical middle-class household. My parents, my younger sister Mia, and I lived in a small suburban home. To the outside world, we were a picture-perfect family, but behind closed doors, things were different. There was a rift between my parents and me that widened over the years, and the root of it was their adoration for Mia. I was always the afterthought. But it wasn't always like that. I can still recall a time when things felt warm and fair. When we were younger, my parents showed equal love to Mia and me. We did everything together: piano lessons, art classes, gymnastics, and our parents were proud of us both. Back then, there was no tension, no subtle favoritism. We were just two kids thriving under a shared golden childhood. That began to change when I hit 6th grade. It started with a single test. I got my first bad grade, nothing major, just one slip-up. But for my parents, it was as if a switch flipped. My mother stopped looking at me with the same pride she reserved for Mia. When Mia brought home a perfect score, they'd beam with genuine joy. But when I did well, the compliments were perfunctory. Suddenly, I felt like the loose thread threatening to unravel everything, while Mia was the golden child who could do no wrong. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But the evidence was hard to ignore. When I made a mistake, no matter how trivial, it was dissected and held against me. Mia's errors, on the other hand, were brushed off with, "She's just having an off day." My dad's favorite line, the one that haunted me for years, was, "Why can't you be more like Mia?" I hated that phrase. As we grew older, the favoritism became more pronounced. Mia blossomed into everything they wanted: smart, popular, and outgoing. She was the class president, the homecoming queen, the girl everyone loved. I withdrew into myself. I wasn't a social butterfly. I was the girl who spent her time with books, quietly excelling in my own way. But no matter what I achieved, it was never enough to compete with Mia's spotlight. By the time we were in high school, the disparities in how we were treated couldn't be ignored. Mia got new clothes, her own car, and all the attention. If she needed help with homework, my parents would sit with her for hours, patiently explaining every detail. When I asked for help, I was told it was too late or too inconvenient. I learned that if I wanted something, I'd have to work for it. Mia, on the other hand, had everything handed to her. Despite this, I tried to maintain a bond with Mia. She was my sister after all. But it became harder to ignore her growing sense of entitlement. She reveled in the attention, knowing she could get away with anything. Even our friends and teachers were drawn to her charm, leaving me in the shadows. I often wondered if anyone saw me as me, or if I was just Mia's sister. The final fracture came the summer after I graduated from high school. I had been accepted to a decent college on a partial scholarship and was eager to escape. Thinking that maybe with some distance, things would get better. I hoped my parents would miss me when I was gone. I was wrong. That summer, Mia started dating Lucas, the star quarterback of our high school's football team. He was handsome, charming, and came from a wealthy family. My parents adored him instantly. It was like he was the son they never had. Every weekend, Lucas was at our house, and my parents went out of their way to impress him, preparing elaborate dinners. It was clear they already envisioned Mia and Lucas marrying and giving them the perfect grandchildren. Meanwhile, I was struggling through my first semester at college, working part-time to cover what my scholarship didn't. When I came home during breaks, I was exhausted, but all I heard were stories about Mia and Lucas. No one asked how I was doing. Instead, they'd throw in hurtful comments like, "Why can't you find someone like Lucas?" Then everything came crashing down with one accusation. During one break, I was home when Mia's new bracelet, a gold charm bracelet Lucas had given her, went missing. It was expensive, and Mia was in tears. My parents panicked, turning the house upside down to find it. When they couldn't, Mia casually suggested that maybe I had taken it. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She claimed she'd seen me admiring the bracelet the night before and implied I stole it out of jealousy. I was furious. I hadn't touched her bracelet, I hadn't even thought about it. But my parents didn't hesitate. They believed her. I swore up and down that I hadn't taken anything, but it didn't matter. My dad looked at me with disgust and said, "We always knew you were jealous of Mia. That hurt more than anything. All the years of trying to win their approval, of trying to be a good daughter, it meant nothing. They gave me an ultimatum: return the bracelet or leave the house." I was stunned. I had no way to prove my innocence. They'd already made up their minds. So I left. I packed my bags, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Walking out that door was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The weight of my parents' accusations pressed down on me, but I knew there was no point in staying where I wasn't wanted. I had a duffel bag and a heart full of anger and hurt. My sister's smug face lingered in my mind, and my parents' cold, dismissive eyes haunted me. I didn't even have a plan. I just needed to get away. I called my friend Kara, the one person I knew I could rely on. She didn't hesitate. She told me to come over immediately. When I showed up at her apartment, tired and numb, she hugged me tightly and told me I could stay as long as I needed. That night, as I lay on her old pull-out couch, reality sank in. My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had turned their backs on me over something I didn't do. The next few months were a blur. I threw myself into work and school, determined to survive. My scholarship covered most of my tuition, but I still had to pay for rent, food, and books. I worked late shifts at a coffee shop, sometimes until 2 a.m., then dragged myself to early morning classes. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. It was exhausting, but I refused to give up. I didn't want my parents to be right about me. I couldn't let them think I was a failure. Kara was my rock through it all. She was there when I needed someone to vent to, someone who didn't judge me or expect anything in return. She didn't push me to reconcile with my family or try to offer empty platitudes about how they'll come around. She knew the damage was too deep for simple fixes. My grandmother, my dad's mom, also stayed in touch. She sent me birthday cards and text messages asking how I was doing. Her words were always gentle, never pushing, just checking in. She didn't mention my parents or Mia, and I was grateful for that. She was the one link to my family that didn't feel poisoned. I didn't hear from my parents or Mia for years. Not once did they call to see how I was or to apologize. For them, I was gone, erased, like a stain they'd scrubbed away. I learned to live with it. I built a life from scratch, piece by piece. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By the time I graduated, I had a decent job lined up and a tiny studio apartment that I could finally call my own. I was proud of myself. I'd made it without them. No thanks to their help or support. But just as I was starting to feel secure, a letter arrived that turned my world upside down again. The envelope was thick, and the handwriting was unmistakable. My grandmother's. I held it for a long time before opening it, half expecting bad news. Instead, it was an invitation to her annual Christmas dinner. I stared at the card, my emotions tangled. I hadn't been to one of Grandma's dinners in years. The thought of walking back into that house, facing my parents and Mia, made my stomach twist. But Grandma had always been kind to me, even when everyone else had given up on me. Something in me told me I owed her at least this much. So I decided to go, not for my parents, not for Mia, for Grandma. When I arrived at her house, it felt like stepping back in time. The same wreath hung on the door, and the same smell of pine and cinnamon filled the air. But my nerves were on edge. I hadn't seen my parents or Mia since the day they kicked me out, and I wasn't sure how they would react. I took a deep breath and knocked. Grandma opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered, pulling me into a hug. For a moment, the tension in my chest eased. She led me inside, and the room went quiet. My parents were there. So was Mia, standing beside them like nothing had ever happened. Lucas wasn't with her, and I wondered briefly if they were still together. My father's face was stiff, my mother's eyes red-rimmed. Mia smiled, a perfect, practiced smile, as if she hadn't been the one to destroy my life. I felt like a ghost haunting my own family. The dinner was unbearable. My parents made forced small talk, asking about my job and my life, as if they cared. Mia acted like we were the best of friends, her voice sugary sweet. I nodded, gave short answers, and focused on my plate. I just wanted to get through the evening. Then Grandma started handing out gifts. I wasn't expecting anything, but when she handed me a small box, my heart pounded. I opened it carefully, and inside was a gold locket, a family heirloom. I knew what it was the moment I saw it. It had been passed down for generations, a symbol of the family's legacy. I looked up, shocked. "This belongs to you now," Grandma said softly, her eyes steady. "I trust you to take care of it." The air in the room froze. My parents' faces went pale. Mia's smile vanished. Everyone understood what this meant. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. Whoever held it was the rightful heir to the family assets. By giving it to me, Grandma had chosen me over them. My mother's voice trembled. "Mom, what are you doing?" Grandma's eyes flashed with a resolve I hadn't seen before. "Doing what should have been done a long time ago." The dinner ended in tense silence. My parents pulled me aside before I could leave. Suddenly, they were apologetic, their voices trembling with insincere warmth. They spoke of family, of forgiveness, of wanting to start fresh. But I saw through it. This wasn't about love or reconciliation. This was about money. They wanted what the locket represented. I left without giving them an answer. The weight of the locket pressed against my chest as I walked out the door, the same door I had left years ago. This time I felt stronger. I had a choice now, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive them. Walking out of Grandma's house that night, the locket felt heavy around my neck. It wasn't just metal and memories. It was a symbol of trust, of responsibility, and of everything that had been broken between me and my family. The cold night air hit me as I stepped off the porch, and I took a shaky breath. My mind was spinning. I could still hear my parents' voices echoing behind me, their sudden apologies and desperate pleas ringing false. They thought a few words of regret could erase years of neglect and betrayal. But their eyes gave them away. The same people who had disowned me, accused me of theft, and thrown me out without a second thought were now clinging to me, not out of love, but out of fear of losing everything they believed was theirs. I drove back to my tiny apartment in silence, the streetlights casting long shadows across the dashboard. The weight of the locket seemed to grow with every mile. I knew what it meant to my family, but what did it mean to me? Was it a blessing or a burden? When I finally got home, I sat on the edge of my bed, running my fingers over the locket's smooth surface. The intricate designs carved into the gold were old and familiar. I remembered seeing it as a kid, watching Grandma wear it during family gatherings. Back then, it had seemed magical, like a piece of our family's history that held all our stories. Now it felt like a chain tying me to a past I wasn't sure I wanted. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but inside, I felt like I was being torn in different directions. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents, Mia, and relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone had something to say. Family is everything. Don't let this come between you. You need to forgive and move on. But where were these voices when I was struggling alone? Where were they when I needed someone to stand by me, to believe me, to fight for me? Now that I held something valuable, they all wanted to patch things up. Their words felt hollow. Mia's messages were the worst. She sent texts pretending everything was fine, like we were still two sisters sharing secrets. But every word dripped with her entitlement, her assumption that I would fall back in line because that's what I'd always done. "I know you didn't mean to hurt Mom and Dad. Let's fix this. They need you." As if I had hurt them. As if I was the one who had lied, manipulated, and turned everyone against her. Her audacity made my blood boil. I stopped answering. I needed space to think. One afternoon, I met Grandma for coffee. She was the one person I trusted to speak honestly. As soon as I saw her, she smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and for a moment, everything felt normal. We sat in the corner of the cafe, steam rising from our mugs, and I finally spoke the question that had been gnawing at me. "Why did you give me the locket, Grandma? Why now?" She sipped her coffee and looked at me, her gaze steady and calm. "Because you earned it," she said simply. "I've watched you fight for yourself when no one else would. You never let their cruelty define you. You stood strong. I trust you to carry our family's legacy, not because of what's in the bank, but because of what's in you." Her words sank deep. She wasn't giving me the locket because she pitied me or because she wanted to punish my parents. She was giving it to me because she believed in me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What if I don't want it?" My voice trembled. "What if I don't want to be tied to them anymore?" Grandma nodded. "That's your choice to make. But remember, this isn't about them. It's about you, your future, and what you can build with it. Don't let their greed poison your heart." I sat back, letting her words wash over me. She was right. The inheritance, the locket, none of it had to be about them. It could be about me choosing my own path. I could honor our family's legacy in my own way, without their bitterness dragging me down. But even with that clarity, things didn't get easier. A week later, my parents showed up at my apartment again. This time, they weren't alone. Mia was with them, her face pale and drawn, a far cry from the confident, smug girl I remembered. My mother's eyes were red, and my father looked like he'd aged 10 years. I didn't want to let them in, but something in their expressions made me hesitate. They looked desperate, not just for money, but for something deeper. Against my better judgment, I opened the door and let them step inside. We stood awkwardly in my cramped living room. My father cleared his throat, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I folded my arms. "About what?" My mother's voice cracked. "We made mistakes, big ones, and we're paying for them now." They told me everything, about how they had taken out a second mortgage on the house to fund Mia's lifestyle. How Mia and Lucas had broken up, and Mia's future wasn't as secure as they'd believed. They were drowning in debt, their perfect world crumbling around them. "We need your help," my father whispered. The words stung. They didn't want to reconcile because they missed me. They wanted me to save them. I took a deep breath, my chest aching. "You didn't believe me when I needed you most. You kicked me out over a lie, and now you want me to bail you out?" Mia's voice was soft, almost pleading. "I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't mean—" I cut her off. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Silence filled the room. For the first time, they had no excuses, no defenses, just regret. "I can't help you," I said finally. "I won't." My father's shoulders sagged. My mother started crying. But I stood firm. They had made their choices, and now I was making mine. After they left, I felt a strange sense of peace, the weight of their expectations, their manipulation, their greed. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The locket around my neck wasn't a burden. It was a reminder that I could choose my own path, one that didn't rely on their approval. After my parents and Mia left my apartment that day, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring out into the empty hallway. Their final pleas still echoed in my mind, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The invisible chains they'd wrapped around me, forged from guilt, obligation, and their expectations, were finally broken. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the wood. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a choice, a real choice. I wasn't trapped by their narrative anymore. I didn't have to carry the burden of their mistakes or their desperation. Their problems were theirs to deal with, not mine. That night, I held the locket in my hand, feeling its cool weight. It wasn't just a symbol of inheritance or wealth. It was a reminder that I could take control of my life and my future. My grandmother had trusted me with this piece of our family's legacy, and for the first time, I started to believe I could honor that trust in my own way. The next morning, I called Grandma. Her voice was calm and steady, just like always. "Hi, Grandma. I've been thinking a lot about what you said." She didn't rush me, just waited patiently as I found the right words. "I don't want to carry this weight around like a curse. I want to use what you've given me to build something good, something that feels right to me." She let out a soft sigh, the kind that seemed to carry a lifetime of understanding. "That's all I ever wanted, sweetheart, for you to have the freedom to choose." I nodded, tears welling up. "Thank you, Grandma, for believing in me when no one else did." Her voice was warm, filled with love. You've always been stronger than you know. Don't let their shadows dim your light. We talked a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I knew what I needed to do. I wasn't going to let the past keep me stuck in a place of anger and resentment. The locket didn't have to be a reminder of everything that went wrong. It could be a symbol of everything I could make right. Over the next few weeks, I started making plans. I met with a financial advisor to understand what the inheritance really meant and how I could use it responsibly. I didn't want the money to control me or poison my life the way it had poisoned my parents and Mia's. I wanted it to be a tool, something that could help me build a future I was proud of. I thought about my struggles in college, the nights I went hungry, the endless hours of work, the moments I felt like giving up. I wanted to use this opportunity to help others who were going through the same thing. Maybe set up a scholarship fund or support organizations that helped kids who didn't have anyone in their corner. I wasn't going to squander what Grandma had entrusted to me. I was going to make it count. But even as I moved forward, my family wasn't ready to let go. The texts and calls didn't stop. My mother left voicemails filled with tearful apologies. My father's messages were laced with guilt trips. And Mia kept pretending like nothing had happened. One day, Mia sent a long message that ended with, "We're family. That should mean something." I stared at the words for a long time. Family. What did that mean anymore? Blood alone wasn't enough. Family was about love, respect, and trust. All the things they'd stripped away when they turned their backs on me. I knew Mia was still trying to manipulate me, to pull me back into the role of the forgotten sister, the scapegoat who would give up everything for her happiness. But I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. I blocked her number. It felt final, like closing a door that needed to stay shut. I didn't hate her. I just couldn't let her poison my life any longer. A few days later, Grandma invited me to dinner again. This time, it was just the two of us. We sat in her cozy kitchen, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs filling the air. She poured us both some tea, her hands steady despite her age. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, her eyes shining. "You've chosen a path of your own." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm trying." She reached across the table and took my hand. "That's all you can do." We ate dinner together, the silence comfortable and warm. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Not because of the locket or the inheritance, but because someone saw me for who I truly was and accepted me. Loved me. When I left Grandma's house that night, the stars were bright above me, clear and endless. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle in my bones. My journey wasn't over. There would still be struggles, still be moments of doubt. But for the first time, I was walking my own path, free of their shadows. And that was enough. The weeks after that dinner with Grandma felt like stepping into a new world. The air was clearer, the weight on my shoulders lighter. I was no longer haunted by what had been taken from me or burdened by what others thought I owed them. For the first time, I felt free to look ahead without the shadows of my family holding me back. I poured my energy into my job, my small apartment, and my future. I started volunteering at a local community center that helped students struggling with the same challenges I had faced. Kids who worked long hours to afford school, who knew what it meant to feel alone and unseen. Each time I talked to them, I recognized pieces of myself, their determination, their quiet strength. Helping them made the pain of my past feel like it had a purpose. One crisp autumn morning, I got a call from Grandma. Her voice was calm, but there was a heaviness behind it. "They've put the house up for sale," she said quietly. I knew she meant my parents. The house where I'd grown up, where so much of my joy and pain had unfolded, was no longer theirs to keep. The financial strain had finally caught up with them. Mia's extravagant lifestyle, their blind belief that everything would work out in their favor, it had all come crashing down. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Just a deep sadness for what could have been. My parents had held so tightly to their illusions that they had lost everything. And now, they were being forced to let go. "Are you okay?" Grandma asked. I took a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I am." I wasn't gloating over their downfall, but I wasn't broken by it either. Their choices had led them here, and I had finally learned that I wasn't responsible for their mistakes. Their story didn't have to be mine. A few days later, I walked past the neighborhood where I grew up. The house stood quiet, a for sale sign planted in the front yard. The windows seemed to stare back at me, empty and hollow. I remembered being a child, playing in that yard with Mia, before everything fell apart. The laughter, the dreams, the hope that family was forever. I felt a twinge of grief for that lost time, for the sister I'd once loved without question, for the parents who used to hold me like I was their world. But those memories were like old photographs, faded and distant. They no longer defined who I was. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the house, to the past. It was time to let go. When I returned to my apartment, a message from Grandma was waiting for me. "I'm proud of you," it read. "You've honored our family in the best way possible, by staying true to yourself." Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought of the locket, safely tucked away in my drawer. It wasn't a chain binding me to a legacy of pain. It was a reminder of strength, resilience, and choice. I had built a life on my own terms, brick by brick, even when the world seemed set against me. And now I was ready to keep building, to walk into the future with my head held high. I knew my parents and Mia might never understand. They might never let go of their bitterness or their sense of entitlement, but that was their journey, not mine. I didn't need their approval or their forgiveness to be whole. I was already whole. One evening, I stood on my balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. The breeze was cool, carrying with it the scent of rain. I closed my eyes and let the wind wrap around me, whispering promises of new beginnings. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the scapegoat, or the shadow anymore. I was just me, strong, resilient, and free. As I opened my eyes, I smiled. The path ahead was mine to walk, and for the first time, I was ready.